Hi and welcome to Power Play. I'm Mike Lecouteur in Ottawa. Vashi Kapelos is away today. Tonight, remembering the fallen and those who have served. On this Remembrance Day, we salute the service and sacrifice of those who have worn the uniform. We also look at what more Canada needs to do for our veterans with former Chief of the Defence Staff, General Tom Lawson, and former Defence Minister, Harjit Sajjan. We'll also talk about transitioning out of the military with retired Sergeant Cheryl LeBlanc. Then, the diplomatic dance in Niagara, Ontario.
Meeting global challenges requires global partnerships.
Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand is hosting her G7 counterparts, and multilateralism is on the menu. Will the protectionist policies from the U.S. derail that meeting? We've got a live report from the summit coming up. Plus, selling the budget and another round of major projects. Both are happening in the next week. So, what are the stakes for the Prime Minister? We'll break it all down with our front bench. Today, we've got Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, and Kathleen Monk. First, though, this is a live look at the National War Memorial here in Ottawa. That is the tomb of the unknown soldier right there on your screen, covered with poppies left by people who were at today's ceremony or those who have just passed on their way home. Thousands were out in the cold and dreary day today to pay their respects on this day of remembrance. On the 11th day of the 11th month, at the 11th hour, Canadians pause to reflect and honor the sacrifices that this country, more than 118,000 war dead and 480,000 veterans. Ceremonies echoed across the country as Canada remembers. Joining us now to talk about the importance of today and taking care of the men and women who serve this country are former Chief of the Defence Staff, retired General Tom Lawson, and former Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan. Welcome to both of you. Now, it's difficult to underscore the importance of this day in particular, but as two people who have served in the rank and file and in leadership roles, General Lawson, how important is it for Canadians to pause today and remember this sacrifice?
I think it's a very special thing, Mike. It gives each person a personal opportunity to look back to relatives or ancestors who fought in major wars in the past. For people who think about others who are in uniform right now, or people who have recently retired from life in uniform to consider the loss of various friends that they had. One thing I know for sure is that the men and women who remain in uniform today are heartened by all of these celebrations of remembrance at all of the memorials across Canada.
Mr. Sajjan, I wanted to know what you think about on this particular day when you take that moment to pause and think not only of those who have served before you, but those who served with you as well.
It's always a very difficult day on Remembrance Day, and just to add on what Tom was saying, the sacrifice that is made, not just with the people who serve, but the sacrifice of the families who have to go away for a very long time, away from their families. And I think about the families who have lost loved ones on the battlefield. It's a very difficult day for them, and it's they need to know that the whole country is rallying around them to show them support as well.
Yeah, and part of the support that we think of as well is how we support them right now, Mr. Sajjan. There are still some of those issues that we have seen that have been highlighted by the Auditor General in the recent report that was released last month on the military's aging living quarters. How big of a problem do you think it is as the country attempts to rebuild the armed forces when you consider the depth of the aging infrastructure that we're seeing right now, Mr. Sajjan?
And you know what, you raised a very important point. Improving our infrastructure is something that needed to be done. It's something that when it comes to our when you ask our our members to live in very rural areas, we need to make sure that they have the right infrastructure, and the significant investment that is being made right now by Prime Minister Carney is going to finish that job. I was just reading some of the budget on defense, and it clearly has significant amount of billions of dollars put aside for infrastructure. And let's not forget also, in addition to where they live, but also looking after the soldiers as well, from increasing their pay, but also some of the relocation allowances, and something that General Lawson knows quite a bit about.
General Lawson, how important is that reinvestment in our forces? We know that the Carney government is trying to spend up to 2%, getting there, and then onwards to 5%. How important, as you see it, as someone who has led the forces, do you see this investment now, not only because we're going to be meeting those NATO targets, but even going beyond that?
Well, critical. I think it, when we go back to the years where I was Chief of Defense and following those when Mr. Sajjan was the minister, we were working on a shoestring budget. Canada was typically taking a defense discount, and we did the best we could. We had a small armed forces, very professional, but we did not have the money to invest in our infrastructure, our bases, our wings, our piers, and our ports. And we're going to have that money now. So that's extremely important, because it will help with the retention of members in uniform and the recruiting of people into the forces, but also the defense of Canada, which becomes more and more important with the geopolitical situation around the world, and more peer competitors putting pressure on Canadians and Canadian friends and NATO. So I think it's critical, and it's coming at a very important time.
Yeah, General Lawson, I wanted to pick up on that. You talked about the geopolitical situation. One of the focuses of the G7 Foreign Affairs Minister meeting in Niagara is going to be on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. How pivotal is it in your mind that the ministers emerge from that meeting on the same page?
Well, I think 6 of the ministers are already on the same page. I think all but the U.S. are quite certain that as they arrive with full support for arming Ukraine with the weapons they need and with the money that they're allowed to put in. But I think 6 of them will be focusing on the Secretary of State, Rubio from the States, and asking, what is the plan from the United States? I mean, as recently as a few days ago, there was talk about perhaps supplying Tomahawk weaponry, very long range, very accurate weaponry to the Ukrainians. And of course, that would be a game changer. All kinds of bases and ports and oil facilities that are right now out of range would be in range, would put great pressure on Russia. That all fell through, and of course it changed. No, these will not be going to Ukraine. A month ago, there was pressure on Russia to call a ceasefire. Clearly, Putin didn't want that, and there was an American pivot to Ukraine to say accept a ceasefire in place, which of course Ukraine's not interested in. So I think they'll all be looking at Mr. Rubio for the way ahead.
Mr. Sajjan, on that and looking at Mr. Rubio, but also the task for somebody that you spent some time in cabinet with, Anita Anand, and what she has to do to try and get everybody on the same page. As you know, maybe as General Lawson said, there's 6 already there. But how difficult will that be for your former cabinet colleague to try and make sure that she comes out of this with a consensus on Ukraine?
I mean, obviously, it presents a challenge given the current geopolitical position that the U.S. is currently taking. And I just remind people that imagine what we could have done in the past. So, for example, when we were 4 nations in Ukraine, training the Ukrainian military at that time to prevent an invasion, a further invasion by Russia. Imagine if at that time more European nations that actually had joined the training mission and were inside Ukraine at that time. Could we have prevented? Now, taking from those lessons, obviously that didn't take place, but we potentially could have prevented, and something that Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU, has even talked about. So that's the discussion that they need to have now, is that all of them need to be on board to prevent the further escalation of this war. The European nations are involved. The U.S. wanted increased spending by the European allies. They're doing that. So now I think with Minister Anand, she'll be able to talk to the U.S. saying that every other nation has stepped up, are doing what President Trump had asked for, but also at the same time that the U.S. needs to come and support Ukraine at this time of need. Otherwise, it's going to be detrimental for them as well.
Okay, we're going to have to leave the discussion there. Former Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan and former Chief of the Defense Staff General Tom Lawson, thank you both for being here. We appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thank you. Now, CTV News also spoke with Canada's current Chief of the Defense Staff, General Jenny Carignan, earlier today, just ahead of this morning's Remembrance Day ceremony here in Ottawa. Have a listen.
I think this needs to remain a very special day. We have a duty to remember. Also understand that today's service is still well and alive, and again, looking at the way ahead to the future. So an extremely important day to remember that spans basically from past to future.
Now, transitioning from military to civilian life is not simple. You go from working for the collective to, in some cases, being completely on your own. Retired Sergeant General Cheryl LeBlanc served as an aviation systems technician for a decade before moving to Veterans Transition Center in Winnipeg. She's also helped other veterans make that move from the service to civilian life. She also has started writing a book on the challenges of transitioning out of the force, and she joins me right now. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi.
So I wanted to start with asking you personally, how difficult was your transition out of the armed forces?
I originally left the armed forces from the Reg Force with no preparation plan, which found myself back in uniform about 4 years later as a reservist. And from there, I had a little bit more preparation because I worked at the transition center and helping ill and injured in their transition out of the uniform. But even thinking I was prepared, I am still in the midst of transitioning. It's been 4 years trying to find where I land and how to redefine service outside the uniform.
Yeah, and when you were 21, you recited that Canadian Forces Oath of Allegiance, which all members of the CAF have to do. It's an act that you really have to live by, but you've also spoken in the past about how there isn't really an oath to oneself when you leave the forces. How important is it to have that type of reset when you transition back to civilian life?
I think it's very pivotal. Like when you join the military, that enrollment ceremony is important. You usually have family and friends that are witnessing you. It is kind of like stepping over the line into the uniform. But when you leave, you're kind of left open-ended. There's no training. There's very little support. Veterans Affairs does have some supports for us for sure, but there's no community on the other side. There's no big hurrah. You're given some flowers, maybe a quilt, and off you go. I think it's important to recognize that you made that oath and that you can rewrite an oath to say yourself or your family or your community. And it's really just kind of like stepping back. I kind of like when you watch Survivor, you know how they like snuff out your torch or relight your torch? It's kind of like relighting your torch and bringing your passion back home to yourself and to your family.
So tell me a little bit about the book that you are writing and how you hope that it could help other veterans who are making that transition specifically.
When I was at the transition center, I identified this need for like a reverse basic training, sort of preparing you for life again, bringing you back home to yourself. And there was only so much I could do at the transition center, and I've taken some courses, and like I said, I'm still in that transition phase myself. And I'm writing a book as more of a call to action to other veterans that we don't have to be alone, that we can do this collectively, that we can come together on the other side of the line. It doesn't have to be at the Legion. And the Legion's great. Don't get me wrong, I think the Legion serves its purpose. But I think collectively we have to come together and get a little real and get a little vulnerable with each other and recognize that that final mission that we're on now is home. That final mission, it doesn't have an end date. We're always returning home to ourselves and our family, our community.
Yeah, and of course, really important to make sure that that is a mission that everybody feels like that they can do properly and support it. Do you think that there's enough supports out there in community right now?
I think there are supports that are available. Veterans Affairs obviously has got supports available. I think there's a little bit of a pride piece that comes into play when it requires actually reaching out to Veterans Affairs for their support and transparency and vulnerability so they can give you what you need. I think there are veterans that are out there that their hearts are in the right place. They're there wanting to connect. There are smaller entities, smaller groups, nonprofits, where veterans are recognizing the need that we need each other, that we need community.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Retired Sergeant Cheryl LeBlanc, thank you so much for joining us and good luck on that book.
Thank you.
Still ahead, we're going to take you to Niagara, Ontario, where G7 foreign ministers are gathering with multilateralism on the menu. Can you expect global progress? We're going to get you there right after this.
Meeting global challenges requires global partnerships. The issues we are facing transcend the G7 and our borders. And this is why it is absolutely vital that we have diverse geographic representation around the table. So let's get started.
That was Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand kicking off her G7 leaders meeting, G7 foreign ministers meeting in Niagara, Ontario. Now, she is hosting all of those counterparts, but she's also invited ministers from other non-G7 countries, including India, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, and Ukraine. Now, covering the two-day summit for us is CTV's Rachel Aiello, and she joins us right now. So, Rachel, much of the focus for a lot of Canadians is on that key meeting between U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Anand. How much is riding on that?
Yeah, hey, Mike. Great to see you. It is certainly going to be the bilateral meeting to watch of this entire G7 foreign ministers meeting. This is going to be an opportunity for Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand to sit down face-to-face with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and try to at least restart trade talks. This is, of course, after U.S. President Donald Trump called them off, said talks were terminated over that Ontario ad. So this is going to be a high-stakes meeting for Anand. We'll see if Rubio has come with marching orders to not wade into the trade conversation at all. Maybe they will focus on other issues. Really, what we were hearing from Anand earlier today, Mike, is trying to find common ground on issues they can all agree on. My read of that is they're hoping to come out of this with some sort of communique or joint agreement that sees all countries sign on. But the United States and Donald Trump remains the wild card, kind of looming over this entire summit.
Yeah, let's dig a little deeper into that one, because we know going into this, Russia-Ukraine was supposed to be one of those issues that they were going to really get into, Ukraine's foreign minister being there as well. How difficult do you think it could be to have a joint communique specifically on Russia-Ukraine, seeing as how that has evolved from the G7 leaders meeting in Kananaskis? Do you think that there will be movement there, or is there added pressure on the U.S. to try and sign on now that we've seen Donald Trump and his sort of language towards Vladimir Putin shift a little bit in recent months?
Yeah, so certainly Minister Anand has indicated, Mike, that she is hoping to make some sort of announcement on that front tomorrow. She is meeting with her Ukrainian counterpart who has come here. One of those, as you mentioned off the top, additional countries that Canada has invited to these G7 conversations. So we'll see what comes in terms of Ukraine, but there are a number of other issues here that have really evolved, as you rightly point out, from the first foreign ministers meeting in Charlevoix when Jolie was the foreign affairs minister. At that point, it was still talking about about trying to get towards peace in the Middle East, that the Israel-Hamas war is now hopefully getting to a different place. That's going to be something they talk about. The global push towards developing critical minerals and the role of Asian countries and Canada in making that happen is also going to be on the agenda. And then, yes, of course, international security. And that, I think, is going to be to your question of will they be able to find that common ground? It's always at these kinds of foreign summits in the wording. So what can they all agree to? That is something that isn't going to rile feathers with Donald Trump, for example, but is also indicating as Canada kind of rounds out its G7 presidency, which is coming to an end at the end of this year, can leave a mark or make sure that they've been able to make an impact with what they've been able to accomplish.
And covering it all for us will be Rachel Aiello in Niagara. Thanks so much for that, Rachel. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, that meeting between Anand and Rubio is set, as Rachel said, for tomorrow. So when we come back, our front bench will be looking at the stakes of that sit-down. Up for us today are Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, and Kathleen Monk. They're standing by, and they'll be with us right after this.
The next 24 hours will be absolutely jam-packed. Tonight, we will hold a G7 foreign ministers working dinner with global peace and stability at the top of our agenda. Tomorrow, we will start the day with a discussion with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha to reaffirm our collective support for Ukraine in the face of Russia's aggression. We will then be joined by all of our partners for discussions on critical minerals, energy security, and economic resilience.
As Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand speaking ahead of welcoming her G7 counterparts in Niagara, Ontario. The federal government is walking a delicate diplomatic tightrope these days. Ottawa is looking to repair relations with the Trump administration in the hopes of getting some tariff relief while also trying to diversify away from American markets. Joining us now on how all of that is going is our front bench, former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne, Dan Moulton. He's now partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers is a vice president at Oyster Group. He worked in the Prime Minister's office for Stephen Harper before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. And Kathleen Monk is the former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk and Associates. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Now, as we heard just in the last hour at her press conference, Minister Anand said, meeting global challenges requires global partnerships. With the U.S. walking away from multilateralism, is that even really possible to emerge from this with a global partnership, Dan?
Well, look, I think that it's certainly going to be the most difficult, most awkward environment for Marco Rubio in that room right now. I mean, it's his president that's been picking fights, not just with Canada, but with all G7 countries, introducing tariffs and causing economic harm around the world. So I think he's got the most difficult task going into that room, particularly given some of his past stances. And certainly when you look at issues like the Russia-Ukraine war, he's been a long-time Russia hawk, and there's a lot of daylight between where the president has been and where Marco Rubio is. And so, I think there's a difficult and uncomfortable atmosphere there for Marco Rubio more than anyone else right now. I will say, I think the G7 foreign ministers have a lot that they can agree on and a lot that they need to prioritize. Certainly, critical minerals, Minister Anand has talked about as being a priority for the agenda at this meeting. It is essential that Western economies work together to ensure that the stranglehold that China has on the critical minerals industry is restricted, and that there is an opportunity for Western development. That's great news for Canada. That's a great position for Canada to be in. It needs to be a priority for us and our economy. And I think that's why you've seen it prioritized in the budget and by the federal government these last few months.
Yeah, and all of those things are things that, Anand will likely have to deal with, but really probably first on her list, or the one that she's most anticipating right now, Shakir, is that meeting with Rubio. A lot of people are hoping to repair relations between Canada and the U.S., given where they go and how it really does sort of start and end with the person in the Oval Office. Do you think we can expect any kind of progress on that front when Rubio sits down with Anand?
I doubt it. I think stuff like that will come from President Trump. I think he's been pretty central, whether it's announcing a trade agreement or announcing tariffs, he's the person to actually do that. And I think, they don't need a formal event or a formal gathering to talk about restarting trade with Canada. I think just the way Donald Trump kind of shut off our trade talks with a tweet, he'll see to restart them with a tweet. I'm not sure Rubio kind of has that mandate to go and, restart trade talks with Canada. I think this is more about talking about that global peace, talking about international security, talking about resolving or how we can try to resolve the conflict in Ukraine. I think that's more the objective of Rubio going there. But I think for Canada and the U.S. to restart trade talks, I don't think it's going to happen in the next 48 hours. And I think if you take the words of the U.S. ambassador serious, it won't happen until the start of next year. So I think we're a long way from getting those underway again.
Kathleen, how much pressure is on the Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand, when you consider that she's told the Canadian press on Monday that she wants to ensure that Canada remains a leader on the world stage, especially coming out of this, as this is one of the last meetings as we hold the presidency of the G7 and hand it off? How high are the stakes for Canada to make sure that they can follow through on that and try and keep multilateralism together for at least a couple of more months here?
Well, I do think the stakes are high. And I do think that the Carney government and frankly, Anita Anand have been pretty lucky to be the chair of the G7 in this very turbulent year with Donald Trump. Because frankly, Anand has been able and Canada has been able to set the table in terms of the agenda, the tone, what they're talking about, even the very location of this G7 foreign ministers meeting is a diplomatic signal in itself. It's in Niagara. So yes, in Canada, but with a clear view of the US and how close and complex a relationship, both trading and relationship is geographically with the US. You can literally see it across the water. And I think that that's really important because it actually echoes Foreign Minister Anand's message that she's been sending this week in the lead up to these meetings. One, that yes, she wants to keep engaged with the United States and obviously keep that strong trading relationship, while at the same time broaden our diplomatic horizon and our trade relationships by inviting other countries like Brazil, like India, like others to the table to have those conversations. And like Dan mentioned, forwarding issues in this year, in our G7 chair year, that are really important to Canadians, like the critical mineral strategy, and talking about that and how it can benefit Canada and Canadians. And so I think that she's got to walk this careful line. And you've seen her in the last few days actually step back from the direct relationship with the U.S. in terms of the trade file and tip her hat to her cabinet colleague, Dominic LeBlanc, and others who are managing that file. And she herself is trying to drive the kind of wider agenda. But just back to, the fortunate situation that Canada is in this year to have been chair. And it does, as you say, Mike, it's wrapping up. This is one of the last meetings, but that we've been able to kind of not been drowned out, but actually kind of shape some of the focus in this very tumultuous year.
Yeah, and Dan, it's interesting because I know you had mentioned it in your first answer and how Canada is trying to sort of rally support around critical minerals between G7 countries. And we saw that with the ministers of natural resources just a couple of weeks ago doing that, while at the same time, sort of having this second dance on the sideline of making sure that, yeah, hey, we're normalizing, not to say normalizing, but sort of restarting the relationship with China. Right. From whom we're going to be competing. There was that interview that Vashi Kapelos had with Tim Hodgson, the Natural Resources Minister, where it was that question of, can you do both at the same time, sort of rally the G7 together against China, but at the same time try and sort of start trade talks with China? So how difficult is that going to be in this next couple of days as well?
Well, I think that's a reality that Canada faces with lots of countries, and all countries, frankly, face with each other. You can compete and trade economically with a country, right? That is a normal nature of state-to-state relationships. And I think that Canada has made a clear commitment to double exports with non-U.S. economies over the course of the next 10 years. And if we're going to be able to get there, it's going to obviously include increasing our trading relationship with growing economies around the world, including China. I think the G7 ministers, though, are dealing, and foreign ministers are dealing with something far more pressing right now, which is that many of the countries around that table have, over the last 20 years, put a great deal of their energy reliance on Russia. And these economies have been woken up from that relationship over the last few years and need to find other trading partners around the world that they can rely on for their energy supply. Canada plays a really important role in that conversation. We need to work with our allies in Europe to deepen our trade relationships and our energy trading relationships in particular, where there are real opportunities for us to be the key export partner. And so I think when we look at the agenda for these G7 ministers, we see critical minerals, we see energy. These are really the top pressing issues for Canada right now. And I'm glad to see them on the agenda in the way that they are.
Shakir, you get the last word on this.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, energy is obviously something that's in very high demand. I think we need to work domestically to make sure we can get our energy to these markets that are want our product. And I think just on broadening our trade relations, this is not a new thing, right? I think for Canada, I mean, when I was working under Harper, we have a lot of free trade agreements. We have a lot of market access. We've been pushing companies for decades to try to get their markets to their products to other markets outside of the United States, and it just doesn't happen. So I wish Mark Carney and his team all the best, but to diversify your trade and to stop our dependence on the United States, I'm not sure this kind of, high-sounding, optimistic public statements is going to match the reality that we confront, where we're just very, very much relying on the United States, and I don't really see a situation where we're diversifying trade to any significant or meaningful level away from that market.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it right there for right now because we have to take a quick break. But when the panel returns, we're going to talk about the budget sales pitch. The government is doing that this week, plus unveiling the next round of major projects. Our front bench is going to dig into that right after this.
I think people understand that the natural resources sector has been key to our national prosperity, to investment in the country, to be who we are as Canadian in many ways. And therefore, that's why I think that with the Major Project Office, the fact that we have now professionals which are looking at that, the fact that the government has put what we have, if you look at the different Crown corporations, we have about 40 billion that we can deploy to support. I think it puts us in a very good place.
That was Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne in Calgary, pitching the budget and previewing Thursday's announcement on that second list of major projects. Now, those are the ones that will get federal backing and get on the fast track for regulatory approvals. Much of the budget and the projects that the government calls nation building are there in an effort to build Canada's economy in the face of U.S. tariffs imposed by President Donald Trump. Now, that issue is back as the top-of-mind issue for most Canadians. The latest Nanos polling shows that Trump and U.S. relations are essentially tied, with jobs in the economy as the top issue for most people in this country. Now, just a month ago, jobs in the economy had a 10-point lead over Canada-U.S. relations. Now, nobody's going to the polls over that one, or not yet anyways, but certainly it does give us an indication of where Canadians are at. So let's bring back the front bench to dig into the stakes of the government's 2 days, that they are just 2 ways away from that major projects announcement, and 6 days before the budget support motion that comes up for a vote in the House of Commons. We've got Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, and Kathleen Monk. Kathleen, I want to start with you on this one. Given the hype that we saw going into the budget, are we best to temper our expectations around this next round of major projects? Because we all remember that Danielle Smith said she wants to see a pipeline on that list.
Yeah, they've been hyping up this major projects announcement for so long, for such a long time, really since the spring, that I really expected actually Mark Carney and his cabinet to kind of do the halftime show at the Grey Cup this Sunday. And apparently that's not happening. It's actually going to be Machine Gun Kelly, a rapper. So I was disappointed by that they've moved the major projects announcement to this Thursday.
Welcome to the 2000s call. They want their halftime show back, I think.
That's right. I mean, I'd take Shania Twain again. I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, that's who I want to do the halftime show. But listen, Thursday's going to be a high visibility moment, right? It's a high stakes moment for Carney, as is the budget and the budget selling and the budget vote next week that you point to. And that's why you see Minister Champagne and other ministers crossing the country right now trying to engage labor, industry, business, communities to sell the budget. And they have to, because frankly, they don't have the votes. And they right now don't necessarily have Canadians' confidence that this budget is really going to deliver for them. And that's the test that Carney is going to face, because he's going to be announcing these huge major projects. And there's high expectations, both from the budget language and from the project language, that it's going to deliver real results for communities and for industrial sectors. And there's a chance that might fail. And then because we are in a big football weekend, roll out all of the football analogies. Like, is he fumbling the ball? Has he, failed to get the kick through the gate? Like, all of these announcements, really have to deliver. And it's a high stakes moment for not just Carney, but for his cabinet and for the major projects office itself.
And Shakir, instead of quoting football, I'm going to go back to the Shania Twain analogy to this all. Stick with me on this, everyone. How much of a risk does the Carney government have that everybody quotes Shania Twain and says, that don't impress me much?
Ooh.
Fair enough. I think the Carney government...
Hold on. I'm getting a call. I think they're going to bring Vashi back tomorrow. Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm done for the day. Go ahead, Shakir.
No, I think the Carney government generally... I feel like since they got elected, their whole thing has been asking Canadians for, a bit more time, a bit more patience for things to get done. And I think this is no different. I mean, whether it's the Trump negotiations, that blew past the deadline, but even in the budget, we see things like, infrastructure spending, and they want the private sector to partner with them. That might be the right choice to the right policy decision, but that takes time to kind of unroll. Weaning ourselves off U.S. independent, which is a central theme to the budget and really to this Carney government, generally speaking, that's going to take years, if not decades, to kind of roll out. And I think even, you showed that chart. For most Canadians, affordability is a top one, top two issue and continues to be. And I didn't really see much in the budget on that either. And so if it's a matter of the economy that's improving, that takes a lot of time. And so I think for Mark Carney, the vulnerability here that I see is that people just run out of patience. They want things done in the year and in 2 years, and the things that he's choosing to do, and again, they might actually be the right policy choices, but the things that he's choosing to do take a lot of time. I'm not sure Mark Carney has that kind of a runway to produce those results, and I think he needs to be cautious of that and move a little bit quicker. And even with the major projects, maybe even head on, take on some politically sensitive projects, right? If you look at the first batch that was rolled out, if I'm reading it correctly, a lot of these things were either close to getting shovels in the ground anyways, so we wouldn't have to take much consequence from the federal government. I think moving forward, whether it is a pipeline or whatever it is, he needs to be able to, butt heads with stakeholders from environmental groups to Indigenous groups, even premiers, and say, you know what, we have a high level of ambition and we want to drive these projects forward.
Yeah, Dan, I want you to pick up on that, but also just a reminder to people that Danielle Smith, since saying that she wanted a pipeline on that list in October, she basically said that she understands that Major Projects Office would need about 4 to 5 months to review her proposal that she is now the proponent for. So she's focused on that memorandum of understanding that she did as recently as this weekend say she's working on with the federal government. So Dan, picking up on what Shakir had said there, the fact that this government is trying to put out this bold list that, could be projects that are shovel-ready or the ones that are going to be a major challenge. How much do you think they need to really put on this list, something that fully does need their help and that isn't basically over the finish line?
Well, I'll agree with Shakir that the first list to me also felt like the safe list. Like it was a list of projects that were further along. They were really important to the country and major in their nature, but they were further along in development and they were perhaps lacking in any political controversy in any of them, frankly, right? And so I would say this project list is going to be the next step on this journey. I don't know that it needs to include a pipeline. I think to your point, Mike, Danielle Smith has taken a bit of the oxygen out of that statement she'd made previously, and I think expectations from the Prime Minister have been set up appropriately about whether or not there would be a pipeline on this list. He's been clear we're going to build one, and the country's going to see those move forward. Whether or not they need to be on the list on Thursday, I have a little less stock in. It will be likely, I think, a list that takes some more political courage in it. I think it probably takes a few more steps in the right direction in terms of projects that are not as far along in their development, are regionally significant in British Columbia, I think, that help to build more trust in that province in this major projects process. So yeah, I think they're taking those steps along in the right direction. I think on the budget though, and the major projects effort, the list that will be announced on Thursday, it's all part of the government's, I think, budgetary goal of of communicating that they have a macroeconomic plan to deal with a moment of great anxiety for Canadians and great uncertainty for the country. I think they had two jobs to do last week. One was to put forward a plan for this moment that looked most credible, that looked as though it was made for this moment and compelling to Canadians. And I think they achieved on that. But their second objective was to demonstrate that that plan also had the support of parliamentarians. There are going to be votes. We're going to pay a lot of attention to them. I think the budget is very likely to pass. But they demonstrated that in a big way when they had a Conservative cross the floor and join their caucus in support of their budget, right? So I think the government achieved its two key political objectives over the last week. And certainly in this moment, they look like the only ones with the credible right to say that they're positioned to govern.
And it's interesting what Dan said there, Kathleen, because, yes, it's a macro plan, but do you really think that it's resonating with Canadians who are sort of dealing with the more microeconomic issue of the day-to-day affordability?
Yes, but if Canadians are concerned still about the threats, the existential threats that the U.S. is, placing on Canadians right now, and they see this government, as Dan said, not necessarily that I agree with it, but if they see this government as the only party that is able to deal with that crisis and has the agenda to do so, then they're going to give Carney the leeway and the time to implement his plan. The challenge is it does rub up against the politics of it all and how long this minority government will last. I agree with Dan that I think the budget will pass. I do think that New Democrats could extract some more things out of the government if they could in terms of making some amendments, making more demands, but I do think it will fly. I do think it will pass next week. And I think that, as Dan pointed out, the Conservatives are significantly weakened from what's transpassed in the last few days with the Conservative floor crossers and exits from caucus.
Shakir, you got 20 seconds to wrap this up.
I'll just pick up on a thread that you and Dan put out there. Whether or not there's a pipeline on this list, signing an MOU with Alberta is actually a major project in itself, and it's a major development. So if Carney can get an agreement and turn on the temperature between his government and the government of Alberta, I'll give him a round of applause, because I think over the last 10, 12 years, it's been nothing but tension.
Yeah, it's certainly not shovels in the ground, but it's planting the seeds of something there. You know what? I'm going to stop with the Shania Twain stuff. I promise that I'm not going to give you guys any more, because you guys are done anyways as the front bench. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, and Kathleen Monk. Really appreciate you guys being here. Stay with us, though. Coming up, we're going to take you back to the National Remembrance Day service here in Ottawa and introduce you to a very special guest who was at that ceremony. Stay with us. Just before we leave you tonight, there's a live look right now at the National War Memorial here in Ottawa. Same place that 103-year-old Second World War veteran Elmer Friesen visited the tomb of the unknown soldier for the first time. He laid his poppy there as he thought of his brother. CTV's Annie Bergeron-Oliver spoke with him at the ceremony.
Mr. Friesen just said he's never seen so many people before. No. Tell me a bit about what was this like your first time here?
Well, it's just overwhelming. I can't believe. Yeah, you know, it's just something really special. I'm so glad that my son thought I should come here to experience this alive, and it's been so moving, you know. I really felt the what shall I say, the sacrifice of so many guys and never came home, and here I am sitting here and people are admiring me for, you know, and it was a privilege for me to be in the service, really. It was just, well, something that just I can't really describe it, you know. One thing I definitely wanted to be, I wanted to be a volunteer, and I did. I didn't get conscripted. I volunteered for what I did, and you know, although I didn't go overseas and get into any conquest or anything like that, but I always like to say this: I did what I was asked to do, and I served where I was asked to serve. So it's great memory now that I had a good part in it. The fact is that Canada was the place where all the British, all the Australian and Canadian pilots were trained in Canada. And so I was a part of that because I was repairing parts that kept airplanes in the air. Yeah.
Well, it was an honor to meet you, Mr. Friesen, and I'm so glad that you were able to make it here with your son. And are you going to be placing this poppy down on the tomb with so many? And what are you going to be thinking about? Who will you be thinking about when you put that poppy down on the tomb?
We're all thinking about mostly my brother. Yes. Yeah, I will. So.
Thank you so much for being here, and please get warm. It's been a long day for you.
I'm going to be very glad when I can get warm. It's pretty cold.
And we leave you tonight with more from today's Remembrance Day ceremony from the Capitol. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Good night, everyone.